You know, the kind of morning that starts off so perfectly normal, it almost dares the universe to mess with it? I was standing in my driveway sipping a warm mug of coffee, mail key in hand, ready to check my box like I'd done every day for the past 9 years. But instead of the clean line of mailboxes lining the curb, mine was buried beneath a wall of potted plants, a massive wooden trellis, and 2 creepy concrete gnomes smirking like they'd just seen something scandalous. My mailbox had vanished. I blinked, walked forward, and realized someone had physically walled it off like it was a tomb. It wasn't just a decoration, it was a blockade. And it wasn't accidental. I turned around and spotted her. Karen. Short bob haircut, sunglasses too big for her face, floral blouse like she was auditioning for a gardening commercial. She stood smugly across the street, watering the same patch of lawn she watered for show every morning, not even looking at the grass. Just smiling in my direction. I didn't react at first. I just took a few slow steps toward the blockade and ran my hand across the trellis, checking for any sign this was temporary. Nope. It was anchored to the ground. The gnomes were cemented into mini pedestals. There were solar lights wrapped around everything like it was some sort of sacred shrine. My sacred right to access federal mail had been entombed by HOA vanity. That's when Karen sauntered over with a pitcher of lemonade, like she was hosting a summer party. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. She just tilted her head and said, "That eyesore was dragging down my property value. Don't worry, your little mail can go to the depot. I've already told the HOA it's taken care of. You're welcome." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had the audacity to thank herself for blocking my federally protected mailbox like she'd done a public service. I managed to keep my cool. Barely. I asked if she understood that interfering with mail delivery wasn't just rude, it was illegal. She waved her hand like I'd just suggested she'd committed war crimes. "Please, everyone gets too much junk mail anyway. I'm doing you a favor. Besides, I'm the head of the beautification committee. The community supports my vision." I wanted to ask her what part of that vision included violating federal law, but I bit my tongue. Karen wasn't going to listen to reason. Not because she didn't understand, but because she didn't care. I've dealt with plenty of HOA weirdness before, overzealous paint inspections, holiday light complaints, even someone once reporting me for having too many wind chimes. But this was different. This was calculated. It was personal. And unfortunately for her, it was also very stupid. You see, while Karen thought I was just another resident she could steamroll with her garden gnome army and self-appointed HOA titles, she didn't know the full story. I'm not just a guy who checks his mail every morning out of habit. I'm the regional postmaster for this entire district. Every single letter carrier, sorting facility, postal policy, and yes, enforcement of mail-related federal code falls under my authority. And while I usually spend my days behind a desk or inspecting routes, I know the law inside and out. Karen had picked the worst possible mailbox to mess with. Still, I didn't show my hand. Not yet. I went back inside and drafted a formal notice citing the specific postal regulations she'd violated. I printed it on official USPS letterhead and slipped it into a plastic sleeve with a copy of the relevant federal code. Then I calmly walked across the street and attached it to her trellis with a clip. No drama. No yelling. Just facts. And a chance for her to correct things before it escalated. Later that afternoon, I heard laughter coming from outside. Karen had called a few of her HOA friends over, and they were standing in front of the trellis, reading my letter like it was the punchline to a joke. One of them actually snorted. Karen tore the notice down, crumpled it up, and dramatically tossed it into a pink trash bin labeled Karen's Garden Karma. The icing on the cake came when she took a selfie with the destroyed notice and posted it on the HOA Facebook page with the caption, "Another angry man trying to threaten beautification. Keep your weeds off my vibe." I could feel the blood rise in my ears, not because of the insult, but because I'd given her a clear and fair warning. She didn't just ignore it, she laughed in the face of it, then made it public. A neighbor commented with a laughing emoji. Another said classic Karen. I realized right then that this wasn't going to be resolved with words or polite notices. Karen wanted a fight. She wanted an audience. What she didn't realize was that by making this a public spectacle, she just handed me the green light to act in full official capacity. That night, I sat in my office and filed the formal paperwork to temporarily suspend mail delivery to our block due to obstruction and safety concerns. It was rare, but not unprecedented. The postal regulations allowed it, and I had photographic evidence, documented warnings, and public proof of her refusal to comply. I alerted the local post office and made arrangements for mail to be held until the situation was resolved. By morning, it had begun. The neighborhood woke up to the first day in decades without mail delivery. Boxes were empty. The mail truck passed us by like we were invisible. I knew the calls would start soon. Karen's little stunt wasn't just affecting me anymore. Every neighbor on the street was now without mail thanks to her decorative defiance. Packages would pile up. Late fees would start. Prescriptions wouldn't arrive. The ripple effects would spread, and Karen would be the only one smiling, at least for now. What she didn't know yet was that I wasn't just documenting her actions, I was gathering a federal case. She thought this was still just a petty HOA dispute. She had no idea she'd just declared war on the United States Postal Service, and I was about to show her exactly what that meant. The first real signs of disruption came around noon, when I heard the familiar sound of an SUV door slamming across the street. It was Mrs. Peterson, a retired schoolteacher who always received her crossword magazines and diabetes supplies by mail. She stood frozen at the base of her mailbox, staring at the emptiness like something sacred had been stolen. I saw her look around, confused, then knock on Karen's door with visible frustration. Karen, ever smug, opened it with a passive-aggressive smile and feigned ignorance. She said maybe the postal truck broke down. Then she shrugged and added, "You know, that guy across the street's been causing problems lately." The gaslighting had begun. And the worst part was, some people actually believed her. By early evening, the block-wide absence of mail deliveries started turning neighbors against one another. People were checking with each other to see if anyone had received so much as a catalog. Someone posted in the community group chat asking, "Is the mailman sick or what's going on?" Karen responded almost instantly with, "I have reason to believe someone filed a complaint to disrupt our deliveries." She didn't mention my name, but everyone knew who she meant. Subtle enough to stay technically innocent, but pointed enough to stir the pot. What Karen failed to grasp was that while she'd turned her yard into an obstacle course of floral warfare, I had turned my home into a documentation hub. I had photos of the mailbox blockage from every angle, timestamps of the formal notices I delivered, and even her social media posts where she mocked them. Her own words, laughing at federal law, were now on record. She wasn't just guilty of obstructing the mail. She was proud of it. But for now, I played it quiet. I wanted the consequences to build. Karen was so busy bragging that she never noticed how quickly the neighborhood's patience was thinning. The man 3 doors down, Mr. Hughes, had an online parts business. He relied on daily shipments and returns to keep it running smoothly. 2 missed deliveries cost him a major client. When he confronted Karen, she rolled her eyes and said, "Maybe you shouldn't run a business out of your home if it's so fragile." I watched from my porch as he walked away, muttering under his breath. The seeds of rebellion were starting to sprout. The next day, I received a private message from one of the newer residents, a woman named Dana who had just moved in a month ago. She asked if it was true that Karen had done something to the mailboxes. I responded carefully, sending her the same photos and official notice I had given Karen. 10 minutes later, she sent me a screenshot of Karen's reply to her earlier question. It read, "I handled the mailbox situation personally. It was necessary. Some people are just territorial." Dana added, "This is insane. She's treating the federal mail like it's part of her landscaping project." I knew the moment was coming to act, but I still wanted the full weight of the situation to land before I made my next move. I gave the order for delivery suspension to continue for 3 more days. That was all it would take. On the second day, Mrs. Finnegan's daughter drove up to the block in a rush, stormed out of her car, and started banging on Karen's door. She was red-faced, holding an empty prescription bottle in her hand. Her mother's heart medication had been due 2 days ago. Karen opened the door just a crack and started to explain in her usual sing-song tone that there had been a mix-up. That's when the daughter shouted so loud, people came out of their homes. My mom could have had a stroke. Do you understand that? Do you? She pointed at the trellis and the gnomes. You did this for a picture, didn't you? You did this for your stupid Instagram likes. Karen tried to spin it again. She claimed it was a temporary garden project that was misunderstood. She blamed the HOA board, saying they had approved the beautification initiative. But her excuses were unraveling fast. People were no longer taking her word as gospel. They were asking questions, and worse for her, they were asking me. I stayed neutral in the public eye, answering only when asked, and only with documented fact. I never once said I was the regional postmaster. I wanted the truth to come from the situation itself, not from any show of force. Let Karen bury herself with her own lies. And she did. Spectacularly. On day 3, I saw something that almost made me laugh out loud. A UPS truck, desperate to make deliveries, stopped in front of my house. The driver knocked and asked if he could leave a few packages for people down the street. I agreed. Within an hour, my entire front porch was a temporary sorting station. Neighbors were arriving, politely collecting their boxes, and thanking me for helping. Even Mrs. Hughes brought me a plate of banana bread. Karen, of course, was livid. She marched down the sidewalk, arms crossed, and shouted across the yard, "This is against HOA regulations. You can't run a business from your home." I didn't answer her. I just handed her a padded envelope that had been sitting among the deliveries. Ironically, it was addressed to her. A gardening magazine. She snatched it from my hand and huffed off like I had personally offended her by allowing mail to exist in the world. That evening, I received another message, this time from Alan, the secretary of the HOA board. He said there were concerns about Karen's actions and asked if I had any official complaints or documentation. I sent him everything. The photos, the notice, the social media posts. I even sent screenshots of neighbor complaints. He responded with one sentence. This is going to get ugly fast. But the breaking point came on the 4th day. A man named Ricardo, who lived near the corner, ran outside yelling that his passport delivery had been delayed. He had a business trip scheduled and couldn't leave the country without it. When he asked around, someone told him what Karen had done. He walked straight to her door and threatened to sue. Karen, still clinging to her delusions of power, threatened him back with HOA fines for causing a public disturbance. Now the HOA itself was involved. The president called an emergency meeting and, for the first time, Karen wasn't the one running it. The tide had turned. The mood of the block had shifted from tolerance to revolt. And all the while, I waited silently, watching as her empire of flowers and fences began to wilt. She had blocked my mailbox thinking I'd roll over. Instead, she had unknowingly shut down her own reputation, credibility, and soon, her authority. And the best part? The real consequences hadn't even started yet. 3 days without mail had turned our block into a pressure cooker, but the 4th day sparked something else entirely: suspicion. People were no longer just annoyed. They were actively searching for answers, some quietly whispering to one another at driveways and mailboxes like they were trading secrets. Others had started walking to my house just to ask when the mail might return. I still hadn't revealed my title. I wanted the truth to shine through actions, not authority. But I could tell the tension was finally where it needed to be. I had given Karen all the rope she needed, and now she was hanging herself with every smug response and passive-aggressive smile she tossed into the neighborhood air like confetti. What she didn't realize was that her little project, her so-called beautification initiative, was being watched more closely than she could ever imagine. 2 days ago, after submitting the official obstruction documentation, I had contacted the local branch of the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. They don't wear uniforms like mail carriers. They're federal agents, and they take interference with mail delivery very seriously. When I explained the situation and forwarded my evidence, they didn't hesitate. One inspector, a man named Ramos, called me directly. He was calm but firm and told me to continue documenting while they opened an informal case. I didn't need to nudge anything forward. Karen was already making it worse every hour she pretended nothing was wrong. The next morning, I installed a new discreet camera just behind the hedges facing Karen's yard. Not because I wanted more drama, but because what she had done was already criminal, and I needed every angle. I captured her dragging a delivery box, addressed to a neighbor 2 houses down, into her garage. It was a long, rectangular parcel. I zoomed in later and confirmed the label. It didn't belong to her. She hadn't just blocked mail. She was tampering with it now. That single action shifted this from obstruction into a full-blown federal offense. But I still didn't confront her. I copied the footage and sent it straight to Inspector Ramos. His reply was short. Perfect timing. We're already close. Keep watching. We're pulling records. At the same time, I started looking into Karen's HOA activity, which I had previously ignored because I assumed it was petty drama. But now I was curious. The HOA claimed nonprofit status, which made certain documents public. I requested the latest financial summaries and contractor invoices under public disclosure right. What I found wasn't shocking, but it was damning. Karen had authorized payments to a landscaping company named Blakely Groundskeeping multiple times over the last 6 months. Nearly $12,000 had gone to them. But a quick online search revealed no such business existed anywhere nearby. No address, no business license, no tax ID. Just a website with 1 page and no contact form. It was a shell company. The name Blakely wasn't random either. Karen's last name was Blake. I had a strong hunch she'd been using the HOA's budget to funnel money into her own pocket under the guise of community improvements. What she didn't expect was someone who actually knew how to follow a paper trail. I printed everything, financial records, invoices, her signatures approving them. I added it to the growing file I now jokingly referred to as Operation Gnome Block. Meanwhile, Karen continued her circus act. That afternoon she hosted a gardening demonstration in her front yard, complete with folding chairs and iced tea, acting like the queen of the community. Her speech started with her usual tone, poetic nonsense about curb appeal, unity through horticulture, and the importance of seasonal color coordination. But then she veered. She started blaming a certain resident for the mail delays, claiming he was trying to sabotage the HOA's efforts to beautify the community. She didn't name me directly, but her finger gestured so many times toward my house that I felt like she was playing charades with the entire block. By then, no one was clapping. The usual HOA loyalists had started backing away from her. People looked uncomfortable. One elderly neighbor even whispered, "She's losing it." The social tide was shifting rapidly. What had once been petty control disguised as leadership was now being seen for what it really was: arrogance built on manipulation and lies. But it still wasn't enough. Not yet. That evening I reviewed more camera footage and saw something else. Karen's sister, a woman who only visited once a month, was helping her open another misdelivered package. They opened it on her front porch, laughed at the contents, then resealed it. I took screenshots of every step. I didn't even need audio. The visual evidence spoke volumes. Another email. Another submission to Ramos. The case was building fast now. He messaged me saying they were coordinating with local authorities and would be conducting a formal visit soon. He asked me not to warn anyone. The next day brought an unexpected twist. A young couple down the street approached me while I was watering my front garden. They introduced themselves as the new homeowners at Lot 17 and asked if I knew what was really going on with the mail. I told them honestly that the obstruction of delivery wasn't due to USPS error but to HOA interference. When they asked how I knew so much, I finally said it. I'm the regional postmaster. I oversee mail operations in this district. Karen blocked my mailbox. She violated multiple federal codes, and she doesn't know she picked a fight with the wrong person. Their eyes widened. The husband let out a short laugh, more disbelief than amusement. You're kidding. The woman just said, "Oh my God, she's toast." I nodded. Toast is an understatement. At nightfall, something even stranger happened. Karen returned to the trellis and started adjusting the decorations. But it wasn't normal upkeep. She was repositioning the plants, trying to make it look like the mailbox had been accessible all along. She even shoved one gnome slightly to the left to clear a path. It was too little, too late. I had over a week's worth of time-stamped photos and video. She couldn't erase that with a last-minute cleanup. But her actions told me one thing clearly: she was nervous. Which meant she knew she had messed up, but she still didn't know how badly. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the entire block had reached a strange, quiet unease. People weren't talking as much. The Facebook page had gone silent. Karen hadn't posted a single smug selfie in over 24 hours. The smiling mask was starting to slip. And I knew, any day now, the people she'd mocked and disrespected were going to see something she could never scrub clean with paint or flowers. The gnomes watched from her yard like tiny witnesses. The trellis still stood like a wooden monument to arrogance. And inside my office, the case file sat sealed in an envelope, ready to be delivered to its final destination. Not through the mail, though. This one would be handed over in person, by the people she never saw coming. The fifth morning without mail was the calm before a storm no one on our block would ever forget. The sun rose like it always did, spilling soft light over the rooftops, but the air felt electric. Still and tense, like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Karen's house looked the same from a distance, all polished hedges and smug perfection, but I noticed she hadn't stepped outside for her usual performance. No watering the sidewalk, no yoga stretches near her mailbox sculpture, no passive-aggressive commentary to neighbors passing by. I had a feeling her silence meant she knew something was coming. And she was right. At 9:03 a.m. sharp, two unmarked black vehicles pulled up to the curb. The front one carried two men in slacks and polos, both wearing lanyards with small silver badges that read United States Postal Inspection Service. The second car was from local law enforcement. A sheriff's deputy stepped out, checked the clipboard in his hand, and nodded to the inspectors. The neighborhood didn't need an announcement. People came out like clockwork, drawn by the sound of doors shutting and boots hitting pavement. First Mrs. Peterson peeked out from behind her curtains. Then Mr. Hughes walked slowly to the edge of his lawn, eyes wide. Within minutes, at least half the street was outside, phones in hand, recording and whispering. Karen's house was the stage, and everyone knew the show was about to begin. I stayed back, arms crossed on my porch, heart steady. This wasn't vengeance. It was enforcement. Justice delivered not in anger but in absolute, undeniable form. One of the inspectors walked up the path to Karen's house and knocked, firm and professional. There was a pause. Then a flicker of movement behind the curtain. She was watching. The knock came again, louder. Finally, Karen opened the door. She had dressed for battle, pastel blouse, pearls, and an expression that was half surprise, half contempt. Her tone was sharp right from the start. This is private property. What is the meaning of this? The inspector remained calm. He introduced himself, showed his badge, and informed her they were conducting an official investigation into interference with the delivery and security of federal mail. Her face froze for a split second, then snapped into indignant mode. I have done no such thing. That man over there, she pointed directly at me, has been harassing me with threats. I've filed complaints. He's just bitter because the HOA voted against his lawn ornament. The inspector didn't flinch. He told her plainly that they had video evidence, multiple eyewitness accounts, and physical documentation of her tampering with federally delivered parcels. She scoffed, but I saw the twitch in her jaw, the nervous blink. They asked her to step outside, but she refused. Claimed she had rights, claimed she would sue, claimed she knew high-level people in the city who would make this go away. The sheriff's deputy then stepped forward, showed her the warrant signed just the night before, and explained that they were authorized to enter and document the premises. The moment the word warrant was spoken, everything changed. Karen's bravado cracked. She took a step back and muttered something no one could hear. She wasn't handcuffed. This wasn't that kind of arrest, yet. But they entered the house, inspected her garage, and began taking photos of the packages that had clearly been opened and resealed. The same ones from the camera footage. When they brought out a small box labeled U.S. Department of State, clearly a passport delivery, people in the crowd audibly gasped. Karen's mouth opened as if to deny it, but no words came. Her sister appeared in the doorway behind her, pale and shaking. She said something to Karen, but Karen ignored her, frozen in place as if standing still might undo everything. The real moment of reckoning came about 20 minutes later when Inspector Ramos approached me directly. He shook my hand, thanked me for my cooperation, then asked if I would be willing to deliver the formal violation notice in person. He said it would carry more weight coming from me. I didn't hesitate. I walked calmly across the lawn, envelope in hand, and stood in front of Karen as the cameras rolled. I said nothing dramatic. No insults. No gloating. I simply held out the envelope and said, "Karen Blake, this is your official notice of federal violations concerning mail obstruction, tampering, and misuse of community funds. You are advised to cooperate fully with the investigation." Karen didn't take the envelope right away. She looked at it like it was burning her. Then, slowly, she snatched it and turned away. Her shoulders were shaking. I couldn't tell if she was crying or fuming, but it didn't matter. The audience saw it all. She was no longer the queen of the block. She was just another entitled person who thought the rules didn't apply to her until they did. The HOA board held an emergency session that evening. For the first time in years, Karen was not in charge. In fact, she wasn't even allowed inside. Alan, the HOA secretary, had seen enough. He stood at the front of the small meeting and read out the findings. Not just about the mail tampering but about the financial audit I had requested. The fake landscaping company, the personal purchases disguised as community improvements, the misuse of funds that could have gone toward playground repairs or security upgrades, all of it was laid bare. The board voted unanimously to remove Karen from her position indefinitely pending a full investigation. She wasn't just stripped of her title. She was banned from holding any HOA leadership role again. One neighbor applauded. Another asked if they could finally paint their door red without getting fined. The atmosphere was somewhere between relief and celebration. Karen's empire had collapsed in a single day, not through fury or force, but through facts. That night, the neighborhood felt lighter. Mail service was scheduled to resume the next morning. People gathered in small clusters, smiling, making jokes, even shaking hands like we had survived some ridiculous war. Mrs. Finnegan's daughter brought over a casserole as a thank you. Mr. Hughes offered me a beer. Dana dropped off a card that read, "You delivered more than mail. You delivered karma." As for Karen, she stayed inside. Her yard lights remained on, but her house was dark. The trellis was still standing, though someone had knocked over one of the gnomes. I didn't touch it. Let it be a symbol. A tiny, concrete reminder of what happens when arrogance meets accountability. I went to bed that night knowing tomorrow, when the mail truck finally rolled back onto our street, it wouldn't just be carrying letters. It would carry closure. The morning the mail returned, the entire block felt different. The kind of different that doesn't come from silence or noise, but from a collective exhale. We'd all been holding our breath for days, unsure how it would unfold, how deep Karen's damage ran, or how far the consequences would stretch. But as the familiar hum of the mail truck engine echoed down the street, people came out like it was a parade. Kids pointed, adults waved, and even the driver honked twice, grinning like he was happy to see familiar faces again. It was more than the return of service. It was a signal that the balance had been restored. And as the mailboxes reopened and deliveries resumed, the trellis still stood in Karen's yard like a stubborn monument, even though nobody was paying attention to it anymore. What was once her symbol of authority had become a relic of humiliation. I stood on my porch with my coffee, just like I had a week earlier when it all started. This time, though, there was no obstruction, no gnome army, no smug HOA monarch watering fake flower beds with real arrogance. Just the soft creak of the mailbox door opening as I retrieved my bundle of letters and scanned the top one. It was an official thank you from the USPS regional director, commending my professional discretion and procedural excellence. I tucked it under my arm and walked back toward the house when I saw Alan, the HOA secretary, approaching with a clipboard in hand and a sheepish grin. He told me the board had finalized their vote. Karen was formally removed, all her fines were frozen, and the HOA had opened an investigation into the fake landscaping company. Apparently, a few of the invoices led back to a P.O. box rented under her sister's name. There would be restitution hearings, possibly even misdemeanor charges depending on how the city prosecutor decided to file the evidence. More importantly, though, Alan asked if I would be interested in joining the HOA as an advisor or voting member. I laughed. Not because it was ridiculous, but because after everything that had happened, the idea of me on the board felt like poetic irony. I declined politely, telling him the neighborhood needed someone who could manage without power trips or secret agendas. I preferred my position at the post office, where power came with purpose, not ego. Still, Alan handed me an envelope before walking off. It was a signed card from the board members and 20 neighbors, thanking me for handling everything with calm professionalism. Inside the card was a $100 gift card to a local coffee shop. I didn't need it, but I appreciated the gesture. Not because of the value, but because of what it symbolized. Unity. Gratitude. A community waking up from a long nap under Karen's shadow. Karen herself had not been seen for 2 days. The curtains in her house were always drawn now, and her driveway remained empty. Rumor had it she'd left town for a few days to avoid facing anyone, especially after footage of the federal agents at her door made it onto a viral neighborhood TikTok page. Someone even turned it into a meme with a caption that read, "When you garden too close to the sun." I didn't share it, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't make me chuckle. A week later, I noticed something strange on my porch one morning. A brown package, no return address, sitting neatly on the welcome mat. It wasn't from the USPS, FedEx, or UPS. No tracking number. No label. Just my name written in a shaky hand with a black marker. I opened it carefully. Inside was a small box with one of the concrete gnomes from Karen's trellis, now cracked at the base, alongside a folded note. The handwriting was messy, but the message was clear. You win. Enjoy your ugly mailbox. No signature. No acknowledgement. But I didn't need one. I placed the broken gnome on a shelf in the garage. Not out of pride, but as a reminder that people often create their own downfall when they believe they're untouchable. Later that month, I had the mailbox professionally rebuilt. I spared no detail. Steel core, reinforced stand, tamper-proof lock, and a custom paint job that made it look like a tiny postal truck, complete with decals and even a little flag. The neighborhood kids loved it. Someone posted a photo online and it got shared on a local subreddit with the title, "Postmaster delivers final blow with mailbox upgrade." The comments were overwhelmingly supportive. One even called me a local legend. But the biggest surprise came when I received an invitation from the regional USPS headquarters. They were hosting a ceremony recognizing employees who had gone above and beyond their duties in the past year. My name was on the list. At the event, the director called my situation an extraordinary example of civic leadership and lawful perseverance. I was presented with a plaque, a small bonus check, and a handshake that felt more meaningful than anything Karen could have ever awarded herself. As weeks passed, the neighborhood transformed. Without Karen patrolling everyone's lawns and color palettes, people started expressing themselves more. Someone installed a butterfly garden. Another neighbor added rainbow lights to their porch. The guy down the street who had been fined for his inflatable Halloween dragon last year brought it out in the middle of spring just for fun, and this time no one complained. Laughter came easier. Conversations lasted longer. For the first time in years, it felt like a real community again, not a kingdom under surveillance. Karen eventually returned, but the power she once held was gone. She kept to herself, avoided eye contact, and never said another word about the mailboxes. Her trellis, once her prized installation, was taken down piece by piece over several days. The gnomes disappeared. The vines withered. It was like watching someone quietly erase their own reign, hoping no one would remember it had ever happened. But we remembered. Not with spite or bitterness, but with clarity. We remembered how easily control could turn into abuse, how pride could blind someone to reason, and how standing firm, not with rage but with patience, could shift the course of an entire street. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to throw punches. All I did was follow the law, keep my records, and let the truth do what it always does when given enough light. It exposed everything. So when I sit on my porch now, coffee in hand, watching the mail truck roll down the street and the kids waving at it like it's Santa Claus, I know one thing for sure. Karen may have blocked my mailbox, but in the end, she only blocked herself from the very community she tried to control. And as far as poetic endings go, that one was delivered right on time.